And I've seen people die, but I've never seen anybody amputated before. And you never forget it.
Gonzo, epinephrine now! Gonzo, epinephrine, please!
They were just shooting everywhere, like wow.
I was completely shocked at the way they handled the bodies, the cadavers.
Welcome to Firing Line 2006. Each year we review some of the most dramatic television pictures of the past 12 months and try to give you an insight into the lives of the freelance cameramen and women who take them. They bring back their stories from remote and dangerous places. Sometimes they're the only window we have on events that affect our lives. This year the judges have looked through the work of 40 camera operators to make their selection. You would see none of these images if not for the courage and tenacity of those who captured them. We take television for granted, but someone has to be there, sharing the dangers and the hardships so we can properly understand our world. And in an increasingly risk-averse society, it's the freelancers, the modern-day adventurers, who do the most dangerous news gathering. These are some of the best sequences of the year, all entries in the Rory Peck Awards.
Now we want you to help us, all of the award to help us. مثل ما انتوا بتحبوا فرحكم وبسطكم ساعدونا. Help, just help us. Please, 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 please.
The awards were founded in the name of Rory Peck, a British freelance killed by crossfire in Moscow in 1993. His memory lives on through the trust which bears his name and works on behalf of the freelance camera operator. Our first film is from southern Afghanistan, from Helmand province, where the Taliban are re-emerging. Mehran Bozognia made the shortlist last year. This time, he headed into Taliban territory with just a local driver and an assistant. Mehran Bozognia wanted to document the Taliban's campaign of intimidation. He'd heard of the schools burnt down and the teachers killed, but never in front of a camera. Following a tip-off, he found a school on fire, and then came face-to-face with the armed Taliban who'd set it ablaze.
If we knew that they are there, we might have not gone there at all. You know. They were just behind the wall of the school, and they just rushed out. I had this feeling that we might get something here, you know, and thanks God, you know, they didn't know that the camera runs, you know. I mean, they said a few times we should turn the camera off, and we said the camera is off, but we like to talk to you, you know. And the other point was they didn't know that I'm a foreigner. I was close, just, I mean, in the film you see my assistant and the other, my driver, and I just looked like them, and I just kept my mouth shut.
The Taliban are hostile to cameras. They believe filming offends their religion.
You have the camera in their hand, so if it's on or off, it doesn't really matter. If they want to kill you, they kill you. We had this feeling that we had the situation under control somehow. And the moment the troops came, that was the worst part.
The Afghan army arrived, surprising everyone. The camera team risked being mistaken for Taliban in the confusion.
We caught in the middle. As the army arrived, we were between them and the Taliban. I mean, a few people got killed, you know, and thanks God it was none of us. I think having the camera saved our life in that moment, so, or at least, you know, so we are not armed.
It's pretty obvious this was an incredible scoop. Many schools have been burnt down by the Taliban, as we know, but to actually capture that whilst it is happening, and then find that the Taliban are still there, and then find that the local security forces come upon this, and then film their reaction as well, and show their degree of competence or lack of it in dealing with this situation, was extremely instructive.
What I realized later, you know, I mean, I couldn't see it because in that moment we were just running, was that they were just shooting everywhere. And they caught Mahmoud, and my assistant took him out and started beating him up. You don't really think about anything in that moment. It all comes to your mind later on, you know, especially as I saw my assistant with a broken shoulder. And in that moment, you just do your job and try to calculate risks always. Don't try to put the team into danger.
Clearly what makes Mehran special is persistence, the ability to go to these places, to disguise himself as something of a local and pass himself off to some degree, which he did. To spend the time doing it, this film didn't drop off a tree, and then having the competence with the confidence to make sure that when the action happened, within the space of a few seconds really, he was there and had the wherewithal to capture it.
Home to Mehran is Berlin, with his wife Birgit. She knows his is a life-threatening job, but his parents know nothing about it.
My parents don't know at all what I'm doing. You know, when I'm in Afghanistan, they think I'm in Caribbean. And yeah, my wife, she just doesn't turn the TV on until I'm back.
I'm very nervous all the time. When he goes to dangerous areas, I'm always in worry and afraid. I would prefer he did something else, yes. I would like it.
It's not only important to tell those stories, I see that nobody else tells these stories. And this is what they expect from us freelancers to do, you know. We do the dirty jobs, you know, as a freelancer, you know. Whoever talks about reward, it must be crazy. There is no reward for death, you know. No. How much are you worth, you know? Can you put a price on that?
It isn't just the fighting in Afghanistan that's destroying its society and killing its people. Stephen Dupont and Jacques Menache wanted to look beyond the obvious impact of the war. In Kabul's old city, they found that narcotics production had created a local drug problem. A riverbank strewn with syringes, drug addicts in a desperate state.
Afghanistan is one of the worst places in the world to live. If you happen to be a drug addict in Afghanistan, you're screwed. People don't want to know you. Afghans don't want to know you. What you're doing is against the Muslim religion. You're an outcast from every angle.
They found a bombed-out house where the drug addicts gathered. It's an exploding problem. 1 million addicts, 40,000 on heroin and opium in Kabul alone. But to tell the story, they needed to show the human impact.
We came across what were two brothers, and we got to talking with them. We ended up finding out so much during that conversation about, you know, broken, you know, love affairs and sort of, you know, living in Iran, and you know, one of their girlfriends had committed suicide, and they're both hooked on heroin. And we knew there, just outside of this bombed-out building, that these two guys would have to be a major focus of our story. So we asked them, look, you know, are you willing to cooperate And they said yes.
We didn't ever really know what to expect when we were there. So when they, unwrapped sort of the heroin, we didn't know if they were going to smoke it or what they were going to do with it. When they started using needles, first one and then the other, and then their needles were like symmetrically kind of dangling out of both of their arms. Stephen and I looked at each other, for a moment while we were working, just incredulous.
Side of me was, very much the storyteller, the journalist. I felt absolutely confident that what I was filming, because it was real, that morally it was okay.
When we got to know them better, I have to say the shock increased. When we saw them using drugs after that, you wanted to stop them. My reaction personally was, let's get these guys some help, Let's forget about the story.
As the filming went on, the team drew closer to the brothers. They bought them clothes, helped them with accommodation, and in the end, put them onto Afghanistan's only drug treatment program.
What's going on now? We're gonna go get them a jacket, and we're gonna go get a jacket, and then we're gonna take a taxi to the hospital. It seems a little, but it's not warm enough,
I'm intending to go back and follow up this and find out where they are, what they're doing, and see how their lives are going. Did they kick the habit or didn't they?
We left on the 6th or 7th day, I think, of their treatment and said goodbye to them. And I called Kabul a few weeks later, and they were gone. And no one knew where they were.
I knew that I'd be shooting some amazing, an amazing piece of life. For me, it really represented the story that we'd set out to do in its most in-your-face, raw and intense way.
Iraq is the other country that features heavily in this year's entries. John Alpert and Matthew O'Neill spent 2 months in Baghdad's fortified Green Zone at a US Army Combat Support Hospital. It's a timeless portrait of life in a war zone.
Yeah, right, he's the only one, sir.
Did anybody go see about that burn test?
Yeah, I'm on already. Kick the fuck out of all those dudes. I need 3 people over here. What we got left to set up. Gonzo, epinephrine now. Gonzo, epinephrine, please.
We got to this hospital, we realized that we were right at the bottom of the funnel, and that they were bringing the war to us. And as the helicopters came in, chuck, 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 every day, and the hair rose up on the back of your neck, and you knew the horror that was coming off of those helicopters, we knew we didn't have to move. Now, we were scheduled to leave after 3 days. The best thing we did was dig in our heels and go to the commanding officers of the hospital and say to them, you have to let us stay here. If you want people to understand what this war is about, and the heroism of the soldiers, but the sacrifices and the cost as well, you have to let us stay. And to the Army's credit, they let us stay.
I think we came in prepared for the heat, prepared for hard work, prepared for to enter into dangerous situations with bullets flying or rockets falling, and neither of us were really prepared for the extent of emotional carnage that we watched. I'd never seen an amputation before. I'd seen people die in various conflicts before, but I'd never seen someone lose their legs. And watching a 19-year-old get his legs cut off is a horrible experience, because you can't help but think that he's going to go on living.
I'd been waiting in the hospital one afternoon when these two fellows from the Illinois National Guard came in, and they just lost their best friend. He had been killed in an attack, and they were wounded.
So what were you doing, and what do you remember?
A burner, the IED went off, and the vehicle stopped moving. My radios didn't work. I had checked to make sure everybody was okay. And Spurlock said he was okay. And Romans didn't answer, and I looked over, and he was gone.
You could tell he was gone.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's okay to cry. It really is.
And over the course of the afternoon, you begin to see how the Army has to deal with the psychological impact on the living. They're guilty that they're not dead. They're grieving for their friend. And then in the middle of this, in comes the commanding officer and presents them with a Purple Heart. And you can see the tear roll down his cheek. And you can see that this doesn't mean anything to him, because there's nothing that's going to bring his friend back. There's nothing that's going to bring his buddy back.
Get better. Huh?
You're wondering how close to push in, because you want to be able to capture this. That's your job. But if you push in too much, are you like a vulture, and are you sitting there waiting for somebody to die?
This guy right here is a pulmonary specialist in the hospital, and every time a soldier dies, he gets up on one of the roofs of the Baghdad ER and plays his saxophone, either here as he's playing God Bless the Child, because he thinks of them all as children basically, or Negro spirituals, is what he told me, and that's what he gets up and he plays his saxophone.
When the soldiers come into the hospital and their bodies are ripped apart, and in some cases they're actually dying, and they die in front of you, you can get paralyzed. And what you do is you focus on your job. I'm there not to be paralyzed. I'm there to record this. And you break it down into tasks. You're looking in your viewfinder, and you want to make sure that you have your iris set properly, you got enough light. You're looking around the room to see who is showing emotion and where your camera should be. And it's when you come back and you look down at your feet, and your shoes are full of blood, and you wash, the remains of this poor person who died off your hands. It all comes back to you in the shower, and as you're lying there at night, and that's when it hits you. I think this program did a good job of capturing what we intended it to do, the heroism of the soldiers, sacrifice of the soldiers, and the brutality of war. I think that we changed some people's minds. We informed some people. But I feel it's time to go back.
Everything I know I've learned from John. I've been the beneficiary of his experience. And that's where this film comes from. So working as a team comes very naturally and organically, because I've followed in his footsteps.
Matt was extraordinarily brave. He was extraordinarily compassionate. And the really interesting thing is that I can't remember who shot what scenes in the film anymore. That's really how the teamwork went. And sometimes I have to, Matt, did I shoot that scene or did you shoot? That's part of my memory too. But for somebody at his age to have been able to do this is just really quite extraordinary, and I'm really proud of him. And I don't know whether this is really old fogey type stuff, but it really feels nice passing the torch to somebody and have them carry it so high.
This is what it's like to be on the streets of Iraq. Ahmed Jassim al-Mullah submitted some of the most dramatic footage of the year. In this encounter, a petrol tank has been blown up while US troops and insurgents battle it out. Another extract shows street fighting in Ramadi. That's where Ahmed comes from, but he says if he was identified, he couldn't work, so he doesn't want to be interviewed. He provides his pictures to Associated Press TV News.
It's appallingly difficult to be a camera person in Iraq today. It's probably one of the worst conflicts that there's ever been for members of the media to work in. The world is dependent on local cameramen like Ahmad, who have the determination to get the story out. They've risen to the challenge.
These are genuine combat pictures. They show the intensity of the fighting in Ramadi, in the Sunni zone to the west of Baghdad.
Those shots where you can see basically almost see the bullets hitting the wall and the ricochet, you could see it. I don't think I've seen anything like that before. It was incredibly vivid, and he was just cool under the circumstances.
The only way to get these pictures is by going up close in what passes for Iraq's front line, the streets where insurgents and US troops come face to face.
He knows the risks, he knows the area. His local knowledge is invaluable. He can move around the area with the knowledge that he can find a way out of difficult situations if needs be. And of course, he always measures the risks in so doing.
But this is how we find out what's really happening in Iraq. Without the camera, we'd always be relying on someone else to tell us.
The job he did is worth the risk, because it tells the whole world about what's going on there. It tells that there is people who are fighting. There's not only suicide bombs. The embedded journalists were telling us about how the Americans were fighting. And this guy is telling us the story from the other side. So this is important. We need to hear another version of the story, not only the embedded journalist's version.
Often the bravest cameramen are those who work where they live. Ali Fadil from Baghdad won this year's Sony International Impact Award for his investigation into corruption. Ali Fadil set out to find why the billions of dollars supposedly spent reconstructing Iraq had left his country with hospitals awash with sewage and babies who died for lack of elementary medical care. By trade, he's a doctor, but he's also become a journalist, and on this assignment, he became a victim.
In the middle of the night, heavily armed American forces blasted their way into my home in Baghdad, the house we share with my wife's family.
Suddenly we just hear the big explosion, and then all the windows of the house, we start hearing the windows breaking down. And then my wife woke up, and Sarah woke up, and Sarah started crying, and she jumped to me and said, Daddy, I'm afraid. And then 3 Americans got inside the room, and they got me out of my bed, and they laid me down here on the ground.
Around 20 American soldiers took part in the raid. The house was wrecked. My father and brother-in-law were beaten up. Their car was smashed. I was tied, hooded, and taken in an armored truck to a military base where they held me overnight. In the morning, they said it was a mistake. released me and gave me $1,500 in compensation.
إذا طلع لي أحد شيء بس أريد أقول للباشا بالديمقراطية هي الديمقراطية جابها العراق.
Right now, I'm thinking just like what the rest of the Iraqis that I know, thinking that I'm gonna leave Iraq. I'm not gonna stay here anymore. I don't think it's gonna be possible for me to raise up Sarah here in Iraq, but I'll come back one day. I'll come back.